My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is what happened on a Tuesday evening in March, when my son looked me in the eye, in front of his mother, in front of his wife, in front of my own grandchildren, and said the words that I will remember until the day I die. Dad, this trip is for real family only. You and Mom, you'll just slow us down. Real family. That's what he called it. 26 years I raised that boy. 26 years of school fees, of late-night fevers, of standing outside his college gate in the rain because his motorcycle broke down and he was too proud to call anyone else. 26 years and I had become the thing that would slow them down. I want to tell you exactly how it happened, from the beginning, because if I skip anything, you won't understand how a father can sit through that kind of humiliation without saying a single word back. You'll think I was weak. Some of my own family thought that too, for a while. But there's a difference between a man who has nothing to say and a man who has everything to say and chooses, deliberately, to say nothing at all. I was 68 years old that spring. My name is Arthur. Arthur Whitfield, if it helps you picture me. I've spent my whole life a quiet man, not because I was born quiet. I was quiet because my own father taught me, when I was maybe 9 years old, standing in a hardware store he used to run before it failed, that a loud man spends his strength on the wrong things. Save your voice, Arthur, he told me. Save it for when it actually matters. Everything else, let it pass over you like weather. I built my whole life on that sentence. My wife's name is Diane. We've been married 41 years. She is the warmer of the two of us, the one who remembers birthdays, who cries at weddings, who still writes letters to her sister even though email exists. If I am the quiet one, Diane is the one who fills the silence, and for 41 years, that balance worked. We raised 2 children. Our daughter Emily lives 2 states away, married to a good, steady man named Marcus, and they have never once in their lives made me feel unwelcome anywhere. This story isn't about Emily. This story is about our son, Nathan. Nathan is 39 years old, smart, sharp-tongued, even as a boy. The kind of child who could argue his way out of a punishment by the time he was 7. I used to be proud of that. I thought it meant he'd go far in life. And he did go far, at least on paper. He works in finance now, some kind of investment role at a firm downtown, and he married a woman named Vanessa 4 years ago. Poised, image-conscious, the kind of person who photographs every meal before she eats it. They have 2 children, Sophie, who is 6, and Michael, who is 4. I love those 2 kids more than I can put into words. This story doesn't spare Nathan or Vanessa, but I want to be clear. It was never, not for 1 second, about the children. Now let me take you back to how this all started, because it didn't begin with the cruise. The cruise was just where the water finally broke through the dam. The cracks had been forming for almost 3 years. It started small. It always starts small. Nathan and Vanessa bought a house in a nicer part of town about 3 years before the cruise. A beautiful house, 4 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, one of those kitchens with an island in the middle that seems built for people who don't actually cook. I remember the first time we visited, Diane squeezed my hand in the car and whispered, "Our boy did well for himself, Arthur." And I agreed. I was proud. I still am proud of what Nathan built with his own 2 hands, in terms of his career. That part was real, but something changed after that house. Vanessa started referring to things as not really our lifestyle anymore. Small things. The first Christmas in the new house, Diane brought her usual homemade apple pie, the one she'd made every single Christmas for 30 years. And Vanessa smiled that thin, polite smile and said, "Oh, that's so sweet, Diane. But we're doing a dessert table this year. I ordered from a bakery downtown. It's more, curated." Diane laughed it off in the car on the way home. Curated, she repeated, shaking her head. Since when did pie need curating? We both laughed. It felt harmless then. A little vanity from a young woman still finding her footing in a new social circle. I didn't think much of it, but little moments like that kept stacking, one on top of another, like sediment. At Sophie's 5th birthday party, I brought a wooden rocking horse I had built myself in my garage over 3 weekends. Sanded it down, painted it careful cherry red, even carved her name into the base. Nathan barely looked at it. "Oh, thanks, Dad," he said, already turning to greet another family. "We'll find a spot for it somewhere." I found it 2 months later in the garage, still wrapped, shoved behind a stack of paint cans. I didn't say anything. Diane noticed my face when we found it. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," I told her. And I meant it mostly. A father learns to swallow small disappointments the way you swallow a bad-tasting medicine, quickly, without dwelling on the taste. What Nathan and Vanessa didn't know, what almost nobody in my family knew, was something about my life that I had kept quiet for over 3 decades. And that secret is the second thing you need to understand about me, right alongside my father's lesson about silence. I did not spend my working life as a simple retired school teacher, which is what most of my extended family believed. That was true for the first 11 years of my career, yes. But in my late 30s, an old college friend named Robert Halloway came to me with an idea, a small logistics and travel booking company, back when the internet was just starting to change how people planned trips. I invested almost everything Diane and I had saved. It was a terrifying decision. Diane didn't sleep for a week after we signed the papers, but it worked. Slowly, painfully, over almost 15 years, it worked. By the time I was 55, that small logistics company had grown into something much bigger, a group that, among other things, owned a controlling share in a mid-sized cruise and leisure travel line, one that operated several ships along popular vacation routes in the Caribbean and along the West Coast. Robert ran daily operations. I stayed mostly silent, mostly in the background, as an owner and as chairman of the board, exactly the way I liked it. We were not a household name like the giant cruise corporations you see advertised everywhere, but within the travel industry, our company was respected, profitable, and quietly powerful. Why didn't I tell my own son? That's the question people always ask me when I tell this story, and it's a fair one. The truth is layered. Part of it was simple caution. I had watched wealth destroy other families I knew, watched cousins stop speaking to each other over inheritances, watched grown men become strangers to their own parents the moment money entered the room. I did not want my children to love me for what I had. I wanted them to love me for who I was. But if I'm honest with myself, there's a second reason, one I didn't fully admit even to Diane for a long time. I was testing something, not deliberately, not with some master plan sketched out on paper, but somewhere in my heart I wanted to know. If my children believed their father was just a modest retired teacher living off a small pension, would they still treat him with respect? Would they still call him just to ask how he was doing, with nothing to gain from it? For years, the answer with Nathan had been slowly, quietly turning into no. The cruise itself was Vanessa's idea, though Nathan went along with every part of it. It was meant to celebrate her parents' 40th wedding anniversary, a big family cruise, 7 nights, through the same waters where I happened to own a controlling stake in the very cruise line running some of those very routes, though at the time, none of them knew that. Vanessa's parents, Harold and Linda, were wealthy in their own right. Harold had made his money in commercial real estate. And this trip was, from what I could tell, as much about celebrating an anniversary as it was about a certain kind of performance. Professional photographers booked for the ship's deck, a private dinner reserved with the ship's captain, designer luggage tags with everyone's initials monogrammed on them, which Vanessa proudly showed off in a group text a month before departure. The group text is where it started to go wrong for us. Vanessa created a family group chat to plan logistics, cabin assignments, excursion bookings, dinner reservations. Diane and I were added to the chat initially, and for about 2 weeks, we assumed we were simply part of the family group headed on this trip. Diane even started looking at sundresses online, excited in a way I hadn't seen in years. I haven't been on a real vacation with all of you together since Nathan's college graduation trip, she told me one evening, scrolling through her phone with a soft, hopeful smile. Then, on a Tuesday evening in March, everything changed. Nathan called. Not texted, called, which itself should have told me this wasn't good news, because Nathan almost never called anymore. Everything went through texts and the family group chat. Diane put him on speakerphone in the kitchen while she finished drying the dishes, and I sat at the table with my newspaper, only half paying attention until I heard the tone in his voice shift. "Hey, so, listen," Nathan started. There was a pause. The kind of pause a person takes when they've rehearsed something in their head, but the actual words feel heavier coming out. "About the cruise." "What about it?" Diane asked, still smiling, still drying a plate. "Vanessa and I have been talking, and look, it's just, this trip is really about her parents' anniversary. It's a milestone thing for them. And Harold and Linda specifically want it to be, close family only, immediate family. Us, the kids, her parents, her brother's family." Diane's smile faded slowly, like a light on a dimmer switch. "Arthur and I aren't immediate family." "It's not like that, Mom," Nathan said quickly, but there was an edge underneath his reassurance, an edge I recognized because I'd heard it grow sharper over the last 3 years. "It's just the ship, the excursions. Everything's already tight on space and budget. And honestly, it's going to be a lot of walking, a lot of activities, late dinners. I just don't want you guys to feel like you're struggling to keep up the whole time, It's supposed to be relaxing for everyone." I set my newspaper down at that point, slowly. I didn't say a word yet. "We're not that old, Nathan," Diane said, and I could hear the hurt cracking through, even as she tried to keep her voice light. "Your father and I still hike, we still travel." I know, Nathan said. "It's not about that. It's just, this trip is for real family. The people who are really going to be there for the next chapter, Harold's paying for a huge chunk of it, and he was pretty clear about who he wants there." "I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. Real family." He said it twice, like he needed to convince himself as much as us. Diane looked at me across the kitchen. I could see her waiting for me to say something, to step in, to defend us both the way I always had in smaller moments before. But I just looked back at her, and I gave the smallest shake of my head. "Not now," that shake said. "Not like this." "Okay, Nathan," I finally said, my voice completely level, completely calm. "Thank you for letting us know." There was a strange silence on the other end of the line, like Nathan had expected an argument and didn't know what to do with the absence of one. "Dad, don't be like that. It's not personal." "It's fine, son," I said. "Enjoy the trip." I hung up the phone myself gently and set it down on the counter. Diane stood there with the dish towel still in her hands, staring at me. "That's it? Enjoy the trip? Arthur, he just called us not real family, our own son." "I heard him," I said quietly. "Then why aren't you saying anything?" I looked at my wife of 41 years and I told her the truth, the only truth I had in that moment. "Because anything I say right now will come from anger, Diane. And anger says things you can't take back. I need to sit with this a while before I decide what, if anything, needs saying." She didn't understand it that night. I'm not sure she fully understood it for weeks afterward, but she trusted me enough to let it be. That night I didn't sleep much. I lay in the dark beside Diane, who eventually did fall asleep, exhausted from crying quietly into her pillow for almost an hour, and I stared at the ceiling and thought about every moment over the last 3 years that had led to this. The dessert table, the rocking horse in the garage, the way Nathan's texts had gotten shorter and shorter, the way visits had turned into obligations squeezed between other things. I thought about my own father too, and the hardware store, and the weather metaphor he'd given me. Let it pass over you like weather. But some weather doesn't pass over you. Some weather is a flood that reaches your door, and you have a decision to make about whether to just watch the water rise or do something about it. Around 2 a.m, I got up quietly, went down to my study, and turned on my laptop. I opened an email to Robert Halloway, my business partner of over 30 years, the man who had run daily operations of our travel and cruise line for the better part of 2 decades while I stayed largely behind the scenes. I didn't write anything dramatic. I simply asked him a single question. Which ship is running the Caribbean anniversary route the week of the 14th? Robert wrote back within the hour. He never slept well either, an old habit from decades of working odd hours in the industry. That would be the Meridian Star. Why do you ask, old friend? Everything all right? I typed back. Just curious. Long story. I'll tell you when I see you next. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark of my study for a long while. I want to be honest with you about what I was feeling in that moment, because this is not a revenge story, not really, even though some corners of it might look that way from the outside. What I felt sitting there wasn't anger, not primarily. It was grief. A strange, quiet grief for a relationship with my son that had been slipping through my fingers for years, and I had been too proud, or too patient, or too afraid to grab it before it slipped away completely. I decided that night that I would not tell Nathan who I really was. Not yet. Not out of some scheme for revenge, but because I needed, one final time, to see what my son would do when he believed his father had absolutely nothing to offer him. I needed clarity, even if that clarity hurt. 3 days after that phone call, Diane and I had dinner with our daughter Emily and her husband Marcus, who happened to be in town for a work conference. I hadn't planned on telling them what happened, but Diane, unable to hold it in any longer, told the story over dinner, her voice tight and careful, like she was still trying to be fair to Nathan even while describing something that clearly still stung. Emily's fork clattered down onto her plate. He said what? Real family, Diane repeated. Those were his words. Marcus, normally the quiet one at these dinners, shook his head slowly. I don't even know what to say to that. Arthur, Diane, I'm sorry. Emily looked like she was about to launch into a tirade, her face flushed with the particular fury only a younger sibling can feel on behalf of wronged parents. But I raised a hand gently. Emily, I don't want you calling your brother about this. Not yet. Dad, he can't just... I know, I said. But this isn't something to fix with a phone call full of anger. Let it be for now. I have my reasons. Emily studied my face for a long moment, the way she'd studied me as a little girl whenever she suspected I knew something she didn't. She had always been sharper about reading me than Nathan ever was. You're planning something, she said slowly. It wasn't a question. I'm thinking, I corrected her. There's a difference. She didn't push further that night, though I could tell it cost her something not to. That's the kind of daughter Emily is. She trusts me, even when she doesn't fully understand me. Over the following 2 weeks, life at home continued in its outward rhythm, but something had shifted underneath, like a fault line settling after a small tremor, waiting for the larger one. Diane stopped mentioning the cruise entirely. She quietly closed the tabs of sundresses on her laptop. When Sophie and Michael, our grandchildren, called us on video chat one evening, both kids excitedly showing off their new cruise outfits that Vanessa had bought them, Diane smiled through the entire call with a warmth that broke my heart a little, because I knew what it cost her to smile like that. Grandma, are you coming on the boat too? Sophie asked, her small face filling the screen. So innocent, so unaware of the adult wound sitting just beneath the surface of that question. Diane's smile flickered for only a fraction of a second before steadying. "Not this time, sweetheart, but you have to tell me everything when you get back, okay? Every single thing." "Okay," Sophie said, already losing interest, already distracted by something off-screen, the way 6-year-olds do. After the call ended, Diane sat very still for a moment, phone in her lap, and then said quietly, "That was harder than the phone call with Nathan." I understood exactly what she meant. Anger is easy to survive. It's the small, innocent moments afterward, a grandchild's unknowing question, that really cut you open. That same week, something else happened that I hadn't anticipated. Something that added an entirely new layer to what was building beneath the surface of this story. I received a call from my old college friend and lawyer, a man named Douglas Prescott, who had handled my estate planning and business affairs for almost 20 years. Douglas rarely called just to chat. When his name appeared on my phone, it usually meant something important. "Arthur," he said, his voice carrying its usual measured formality, "we need to talk about something in your will. It's about the trust provisions for Nathan and Emily. Given some recent changes in the tax code, and frankly, given some things Robert mentioned to me about the cruise company situation, I think it's time we reviewed the entire structure." My stomach tightened slightly. "What things did Robert mention?" There was a brief pause. "He mentioned you asked about a particular ship en route. He didn't say why, but knowing you, Arthur, and knowing you've called me the week after, I put 2 and 2 together. Is everything all right with Nathan?" I sighed and told Douglas the whole story. The phone call, the words "real family," the years of small humiliations leading up to it. Douglas listened quietly, the way good lawyers do without interrupting. When I finished, he said something that stuck with me for the rest of this ordeal. "Arthur, I've drafted wills for a lot of wealthy men over the years. Do you know what I've learned? Money doesn't create character in children. It only reveals what was already there. The father who dies broke and the father who dies wealthy. Their children show you exactly who they are the moment they believe there's nothing left to gain." "So what do you suggest?" I asked. "I suggest," Douglas said carefully, "that before we change a single word in that will, you let this situation play out fully. Let your son show you exactly who he is when he believes you have nothing to give him. Then we'll know exactly how to write the next chapter." I agreed. And that decision, the decision to simply wait, watch, and let the truth reveal itself naturally, became the backbone of everything that followed. The cruise departed on a Saturday morning in mid-April. Diane and I did not go to the port to see them off. Nathan hadn't invited us to, not even for that small gesture, and neither of us had the heart to ask. Instead, we spent that Saturday quietly. Diane worked in her garden, planting the year's first tomatoes, something she always found calming. I sat on the porch reading, though in truth I read the same page of my book about 6 times without absorbing a word of it. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Ship departed on schedule. Crew manifest confirmed. You sure you don't want me to give you a call when we hit international waters, old friend?" I typed back, "No calls. Let it run its course. I'll check in with you when I need to." What I hadn't told Diane yet, what I was still deciding whether to tell her at all, was that I had quietly arranged, through Robert, for the ship's crew to be alerted, in the most subtle and professional way possible, that the Whitfield family group in cabin block C, deck 7, included relatives of the company's chairman, without specifying which relative or in what capacity. This wasn't favoritism in the traditional sense, and it certainly wasn't sabotage. It was simply this: I wanted eyes on the situation. I wanted, if something significant happened, for someone trustworthy to be nearby to witness it honestly, without either exaggerating or downplaying whatever unfolded. Robert understood immediately why I wanted this, without me needing to explain every detail. 30 years of friendship builds that kind of understanding. The first 3 days of the cruise passed in ordinary fashion, based on the photos Vanessa posted publicly on social media. Professionally lit shots of Sophie and Michael on the pool deck, Harold and Linda toasting champagne glasses against a sunset backdrop, Nathan looking relaxed and tan in a way I hadn't seen him look in years. Diane looked at those photos more than she probably should have, scrolling through them late at night when she thought I was asleep. I never said anything about it. I understood the impulse completely. It's a strange kind of pain, watching your family celebrate joyfully in a space you were told you didn't belong in. On the fourth day, everything changed. I learned about what happened on day 4 not from Nathan, not from Vanessa, but from Robert, who called me late that evening with something clear and urgent in his voice that I hadn't heard from him in years. "Arthur," he said, "you need to sit down for this." "I'm sitting," I told him, though I wasn't. I was standing in my kitchen, and Diane, sensing something in my posture, had already stopped what she was doing and turned to watch me. "There was an incident on the ship today," Robert said, "involving your son's family." My chest tightened. "Is everyone all right? The kids?" "Everyone's physically fine," Robert said quickly, hearing the fear in my voice. "But there was a significant altercation, and it's escalated to the point where the ship's captain and the onboard guest relations director are involved, and it's landed on my desk because of who's involved and, frankly, because your name came up." "My name came up? How?" Robert exhaled slowly on the other end of the line. "Arthur, your son got into a public argument with his father-in-law, Harold, in the middle of the main dining room, in front of at least 40 other passengers. From what the incident report says, it started over the dinner reservation with the ship's captain. Apparently there was some mix-up. Harold's party was seated at a smaller table than expected, and Harold, by all accounts, absolutely lost his composure. He accused the crew of incompetence, demanded refunds, threatened to leave negative reviews that would, quote, destroy this company's reputation. And in the middle of all that, your son, trying to smooth things over or maybe trying to impress his father-in-law, told the dining room staff, loudly enough that other tables heard it, something to the effect of, and I'm reading this directly from the guest relations report, "Do you know who my father-in-law is? He could buy this whole cruise line if he wanted to." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Diane sat down across from me, her eyes wide, waiting. "There's more," Robert continued. "The guest relations director, a woman named Priya Anand, very sharp, very experienced. She's the one who flagged it directly to me because your family's name was in the cabin notes. She personally went to speak with your son's table to de-escalate things, and this is the part you need to hear carefully, Arthur. Your son apparently said to her, and again I'm reading directly, you people clearly don't understand the value of the guests on this ship. My father-in-law has more money than this entire company. And frankly, my own father owns actual assets too, even though he never talks about it. So don't think we're just some average family you can shuffle to a bad table." I felt something strange happen in my chest when Robert read that line. Not pride, exactly. Something closer to a bitter, sad kind of recognition. My son, in a moment of embarrassment, had reached for the idea of me. My own father owns actual assets too, as a kind of currency to throw onto the table, a vague boast about a father he had only weeks earlier called not real family. He didn't even know what those assets were. He was gambling with an idea of me that he didn't understand, using it as a shield in a moment of social panic, the same way he might name-drop a distant wealthy uncle he'd never actually spoken to. Priya handled it professionally, Robert continued. She offered to move the table, offered a complimentary bottle of wine, standard de-escalation protocol. But Harold wasn't having it. He demanded to speak to, quote, whoever actually owns this company. And he said it loud enough that it's now something of a small legend among the crew on that ship tonight. Diane put her hand over her mouth. "Oh my God, Arthur." "There's one more thing," Robert said, and I could hear a strange note of something almost like amusement creeping into his exhausted voice, the kind of tired laugh a man lets out after a long, absurd day. Priya, being the excellent professional she is, calmly told Harold, quote, "Sir, I understand your frustration, and I will personally ensure this is escalated appropriately." And then she came straight to her office and called me. Because as it happens, Arthur, you're the person who actually owns this company. So, in a very real, very literal way, your son's father-in-law demanded to speak to you tonight, without having the faintest idea who you actually are. I sat there for a long moment in silence, and I want to tell you honestly what I felt, because it wasn't triumph. I felt something closer to sorrow. My son had thrown my name around as a vague, unverified boast to save face in front of his in-laws. The same father he had told, only weeks before, that he wasn't real family enough to bring on this very trip. There was something deeply, painfully ironic about it, but irony isn't the same thing as satisfaction. It just sits in your stomach like a stone. "What do you want me to do, Arthur?" Robert asked gently. "I can have Priya handle it exactly as she would any other guest complaint. Nobody needs to know anything more than that. Or if you want, I could quietly step in." I thought about it for a long moment. "Do nothing yet," I finally said. "Let Priya handle it exactly as she would for any other passenger. No special treatment either way. I want to see how this settles on its own before I decide anything." The days that followed the dining room incident brought a strange, uneasy quiet to the cruise, at least based on what little we could glean from a distance. Vanessa's social media posts slowed down considerably. No more sunset champagne toasts, no more caption photos of "the best trip ever" with a string of celebratory emojis. Diane noticed it too. "Something happened," she said, scrolling through Vanessa's noticeably quieter feed on day 6. "Look, there's nothing from yesterday at all. That's not like her." I didn't tell Diane about the dining room incident. Not yet. I wasn't hiding it out of secrecy for its own sake. I simply wanted to see the whole picture unfold before laying it all out for her at once. Diane had endured enough half-updates and confusing developments over these past weeks. I wanted, when I finally told her everything, to tell her a complete story, not a series of fragments that would only leave her anxious and guessing. On day 7, the final full day of the cruise, Robert called me again, this time with news that changed the entire shape of what was coming. "Arthur, there's been a development, and I think you need to be involved now, directly, not through me anymore." "What happened?" "Harold filed a formal written complaint with the ship's management, demanding a full refund for his entire party. That's 11 passengers, Arthur, including your grandchildren, your son, and his wife. And he's threatening legal action for what he's calling discriminatory seating practices and staff incompetence. It's baseless. Our legal team has already reviewed the incident logs, and Harold doesn't have a case. But he's demanding a meeting with, quote, the person actually in charge of this company before the ship docks tomorrow morning. He wants it in person tomorrow at the final formal dinner tonight, in front of, I assume, exactly the same audience that watched him lose his composure the first time. He wants a public apology and a public refund, staged as visibly as his original embarrassment was. I closed my eyes and thought for a long moment. Diane was watching me from across the room, and this time, I didn't try to hide the seriousness on my face. "Robert," I said slowly, "I think it's time I went to that ship myself." I told Diane everything that night, the full story, from the very first phone call from Robert about the dining room incident, all the way through Harold's formal written complaint and his demand to meet whoever actually owns this company. I watched her face travel through a dozen different emotions as I spoke. Shock, hurt, a flicker of something like vindication, and finally a kind of exhausted sadness that mirrored exactly what I'd been feeling myself. "So, you're going," she said when I finished. It wasn't really a question. "I'm going," I confirmed. "There's a company jet that can have me there by tonight if I leave within the hour. The ship makes its final port call tomorrow morning at 10. The formal farewell dinner is tonight at 8. Do you want me to come with you?" I thought about that carefully. Part of me wanted her there badly. 41 years of marriage teaches you how much strength you draw from a spouse simply being present in a hard moment. But another part of me, the part that had been sitting with this decision for weeks now, felt strongly that this needed to unfold with a specific kind of clarity. and having both of us there might complicate the emotional shape of what was coming. "I think I need to do this one alone," I told her gently. "But I promise you, Diane, when I come back, you will know absolutely everything, and nothing about this family will ever be quiet or unspoken again. I'm done with quiet. I think quiet has run its course." She reached across the table and took both of my hands in hers. "Your father told you to let things pass over you like weather, didn't he? You told me that story years ago." "He did." "Well," Diane said, her eyes glistening but her voice steady, "I think some weather needs to be met head-on, Arthur. I think it's time." I arrived at the private airstrip near the ship's final port just after 7 that evening, and Robert was there waiting for me personally, something he almost never did anymore given his usual preference for staying behind the scenes of daily operations. He looked older than I remembered from our last meeting, though it had only been a few months. This business ages a man in specific, cumulative ways, the way raising difficult children ages a parent. "You look tired, old friend," he said, clasping my shoulder as I stepped off the small jet. "I am tired," I admitted, "but not in the way you think." He drove me himself to the port, and on the way, he filled me in on the final details. The farewell dinner starts at 8. Formal attire, live orchestra, the whole production. It's the ship's tradition for the last night of every cruise. Harold has apparently already told several other passengers at his table that he intends to, quote, "get to the bottom of this incompetence tonight, one way or another." Priya has kept things calm on the surface, but there's real tension building. Your son's family and Harold's family are seated together at the captain's table tonight. Final night courtesy seating, arranged before any of this happened. And Priya knows I'm coming? She knows. She's the only crew member who does, besides the captain himself. I told her to treat it exactly like any other unannounced ownership visit. Professional, low-key, no fanfare unless the situation calls for it. We arrived at the port just after 7:30, and I want to describe for you the strange, surreal feeling of walking up that gangway in a formal charcoal suit Robert had thoughtfully brought for me, knowing that somewhere inside that enormous glowing ship, my own son was sitting at a dinner table, completely unaware that his father, the father he'd called not real family only weeks before, was minutes away from walking through those doors. Priya met me at the top of the gangway personally. She was a composed woman in her 40s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of calm authority that instantly told you she'd handled far worse situations than an entitled father-in-law's tantrum. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "it's an honor to finally meet you in person. I wish it were under better circumstances." "Please, call me Arthur," I said, "and don't apologize for the circumstances. None of this is your doing. You handled everything exactly as you should have." "Your son doesn't know you're the owner," she said quietly, almost like a question, as we walked together down the elegant corridor toward the main dining hall, the sound of a live orchestra drifting faintly ahead of us. "No," I confirmed. "He doesn't. Almost no one in my family does, except my wife, my daughter, and now, apparently, you." Priya studied my face for a moment with something like quiet respect. That must have been a difficult thing to carry all these years. "It has been," I admitted. "But tonight, I think that particular weight comes off." The dining hall was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, an orchestra playing something soft and elegant near a grand staircase at the far end of the room. I stood near the entrance for a moment, scanning the tables, and then I saw them. Nathan sat with his back mostly to me, gesturing animatedly about something to Vanessa, who looked tense, her jaw tight beneath a practiced smile. Harold sat at the head of their long table, red-faced even now, gesturing with a wine glass toward one of the ship's staff standing nearby, clearly mid-complaint about something. Linda sat beside him, looking embarrassed, occasionally placing a hand on his arm as if trying to physically lower his volume. Sophie and Michael sat further down the table, both a little quieter than I'd expect from children on the final glamorous night of a cruise, likely sensing the way children always sense that the adults around them were unhappy in a way they couldn't fully name. Priya walked ahead of me calmly, approached the table, and spoke in a clear, professional voice that carried just far enough for the surrounding tables to hear, though not so loudly as to seem staged. Mr. Harrington, I understand you've requested to speak with someone in a position of ownership regarding your concerns from earlier this week. Harold set down his wine glass with a heavy clink. Finally, he said, loud enough that several nearby tables turned to look. It's about time someone with actual authority showed up. I want a full refund, and I want a formal apology for the way my family was treated on this so-called luxury cruise. Mr. Harrington, Priya said, her voice steady and unhurried, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Arthur Whitfield, chairman of the board and majority owner of the company that operates this vessel. I stepped forward into full view. I watched several things happen at once, in a strange, slow-motion clarity that I don't think I'll ever fully forget. Harold's face shifted from indignant fury to sudden, confused recalculation. Linda's mouth opened slightly. And Nathan, my son Nathan, turned in his chair, saw my face, and went completely, utterly white, the color draining from him like someone had pulled a plug. "Dad?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper, though in the sudden quiet that had fallen over that end of the dining hall, it carried further than he probably intended. How are you? Vanessa's expression cycled through something close to panic, then confusion, then a dawning, horrified realization that I watched settle over her face like a shadow crossing the sun. Harold, to his credit, recovered his composure faster than his son-in-law did, though his voice had lost every ounce of its earlier bravado. "I'm sorry, did you say, Chairman, you own this ship?" "I own the company that operates the ship, yes," I said calmly, my voice even, unhurried, exactly the tone I would have used discussing weather with a neighbor. "Mr. Harrington, I understand you have concerns about your experience this week. I'd like to hear them directly if you're willing." Harold sat there for a long moment, visibly recalibrating an entire argument he'd spent a week rehearsing, an argument built entirely on the assumption that he was the most important person in any room he occupied. The seating on the first formal night was completely inadequate for a party of our stature, and the staff response was frankly insulting given what we paid for this experience. "I've read the full incident report," I said, still calm, still even. "Your party was seated at a table for 8 when your reservation was for 11, due to an administrative error on our end. Your on-site experience manager, Ms. Anand here, offered you an upgraded table, a complimentary bottle of a very good Bordeaux, and a personal apology within 11 minutes of the initial complaint. That's an excellent response time by any hospitality standard, Mr. Harrington, and I'd be happy to review the footage with you personally if you feel otherwise." Harold opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing dishonest in what I'd said, and I think some part of him knew it. The wind had simply gone out of him, the way it goes out of any man whose anger was never really about the thing he claimed it was about. Then I turned to look at my son. Nathan was still staring at me, his face a mixture of shock, shame, and something that looked almost like fear. Not fear of me physically, but the particular fear a person feels when the ground they thought was solid suddenly reveals itself to be something else entirely. "Dad," he said again, quieter this time. You own a cruise line? Since when? Why didn't you?" "We'll talk," I said, my voice softening only slightly though still steady. "Not here, not like this, but we will talk, Nathan. Tonight, if you're willing." I want to pause the story here for a moment because I think it's important for you to understand what I felt standing in that dining room, surrounded by the quiet, curious stares of dozens of strangers. My own son looking at me like he'd never truly seen me before. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be completely honest about that because I think it would be easy telling the story to make it sound like some grand moment of vindication the humble father finally revealed as the powerful man all along, the ungrateful son put in his place. But that's not what it felt like from the inside. What it felt like was grief, layered over grief. Grief that it had taken something this dramatic for my son to look at me with real attention. Grief that 39 years of quiet love hadn't been enough to earn the same respect that one sudden revelation of wealth had produced in the span of 10 seconds. That, more than anything else, was the wound underneath this whole story. Priya, sensing the delicate tension in the room, guided things toward a graceful close. Mr. Harrington, on behalf of the company, I'll process a partial goodwill credit for the inconvenience, and I hope the remainder of your evening is enjoyable. Harold nodded stiffly, clearly eager to escape the sudden social spotlight he'd created for himself. I asked Priya quietly if there was somewhere private Nathan and I could talk, and she directed us to a small officer's lounge just off the main deck, quiet, away from curious eyes. Nathan followed me there in near total silence, and Vanessa, after a brief, whispered exchange with him, chose to stay behind with the children, though I caught her staring after us with an expression I couldn't quite name, somewhere between calculation and dawning shame. The officer's lounge was small and quiet, decorated simply, a window looking out over the dark water and the distant lights of the port we'd be docking at come morning. Nathan sat across from me at a small round table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything at all. Finally, he spoke. How long? How long what? How long have you owned this company? A cruise line, Dad. You own an actual cruise line, and I've spent my whole adult life thinking you were just a retired teacher living off a pension. About 30 years, I said quietly, give or take. Nathan let out a short, disbelieving laugh, though there was no humor in it at all. 30 years. Dad, we've had money conversations at family dinners where you sat there quiet while I complained about my mortgage. 30 years, and you just sat there. Yes, I said simply. Why? His voice cracked slightly on that single word, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I saw something raw and unguarded cross my son's face. Not the polished, image-conscious version of Nathan that had slowly replaced the boy I raised, but something closer to the child he used to be. I took a long breath before answering, because I wanted to get this exactly right. Because I wanted you to love me for being your father, Nathan, not for what I could give you. I watched what money did to other families over the years. Cousins who stopped speaking, siblings who sued each other, children who only called their parents around the holidays once they smelled an inheritance coming. I didn't want that for us. I wanted, more than almost anything else in my life, for my children to want me in a room simply because I was their father, not because of anything attached to my name. Nathan's jaw tightened. So this was a test. In a way, I admitted. Not a cruel one. Not something I sat down and designed on paper. But yes, somewhere underneath it all, I think I was watching. I think I've been watching for years, Nathan, and I think you know that, if you're honest with yourself. He was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his clasped hands. The cruise, he finally said. You knew, before I even told you not to come. You already... No, I said firmly. I didn't know about this specific cruise until you called and told me your father-in-law wanted real family only. I only found out this ship belonged to my own company after that phone call. I want you to understand that distinction clearly, Nathan. This wasn't a trap I laid for you. This was a truth that happened to surface at the worst possible moment for your pride, entirely because of choices you made, not because I engineered anything. Nathan flinched slightly at the words, real family only, hearing them repeated back to him in my calm voice, and I watched something like genuine shame settle over his features. Dad, Let me finish, I said gently, but firmly. I need to say this, and I need you to actually hear it, not just wait for your turn to defend yourself. For 3 years now, Nathan, I have watched you slowly shrink your mother and me down to something smaller and smaller in your life. A rocking horse I built with my own 2 hands, shoved behind paint cans in your garage. A pie your mother has made every Christmas for 30 years, quietly replaced because it wasn't curated enough for your new life. And then, 3 weeks ago, you called your own mother and me on the phone and told us we weren't real family. Do you understand what that did to her? To me? Nathan's eyes were wet now, and he wiped at them quickly, almost angrily, like a man unused to crying in front of anyone, least of all his own father. I didn't mean it like that, Dad. I swear I didn't mean it the way it sounded. Then how did you mean it? I asked, not unkindly but directly. He was silent for a long time before answering. Vanessa's parents, they're a certain kind of people, Dad. Image matters to them, a lot. And I think somewhere along the way, I started worrying that you and Mom would seem, I don't know, simple, old-fashioned. I was embarrassed, and I hate saying that out loud, but it's true. I was embarrassed of my own parents in front of my in-laws, and that's an awful thing to admit. But it's the truth. Hearing him say it plainly like that hurt in a way I hadn't fully prepared for, even though some part of me had suspected exactly this for years. But there was also, underneath the hurt, something small and important. It was the first completely honest thing my son had said to me in longer than I could remember. And tonight, I said quietly, when you needed something to hold on to in front of Harold, when you felt embarrassed and small in that dining room, what did you reach for? Nathan looked up at me, understanding immediately what I meant. I told them you owned assets. I don't even know why I said it. I didn't know if it was even true, not really. I needed something to say. You reached for an idea of your father, I said. The same father you told wasn't real family enough to bring on this trip. Because in your moment of panic, some part of you still knew, underneath all of it, that your father was someone worth being proud of. You just didn't want to be proud of me in the ordinary, quiet way. You wanted a version of me that could rescue your image in a crisis. Nathan put his head in his hands. God, Dad. When you say it like that, it sounds like the truth, I said softly. I'm not saying this to punish you, Nathan. I'm 68 years old. I don't have the energy left in me for punishment, and honestly, I never did. I'm saying this because I love you, and because your mother is at home right now, still hurting from a phone call you probably don't even fully remember making, and because somewhere in that dining room tonight are 2 children, my grandchildren, who are watching how their father treats his own parents, and who will one day treat you exactly the way they learned to. That last part seemed to land harder than anything else I'd said. Nathan looked up at me, his eyes red, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. What happens now? He finally asked, his voice small in a way I hadn't heard from him since he was a teenager. That depends on you, I said. Not on me revealing some big fortune, not on this cruise line, not on anything material. It depends on whether you're willing to actually look at the last 3 years honestly, and whether you're willing to do the harder work of repairing something you've let erode piece by piece without really noticing you were doing it. I don't even know where to start. You start, I said, by calling your mother. Tonight. Not tomorrow, not when you're back on dry land and had time to compose some polished explanation. Tonight, while this is still raw, while you still feel exactly what you're feeling right now. Call her, and don't defend yourself. Just listen to what 3 weeks of silence has done to her, and let her say all of it, even the parts that are hard to hear. Nathan nodded slowly, pulling out his phone with hands that visibly shook slightly. And Nathan, I added before he dialed, I don't want you telling Harold or Linda or anyone else on this ship about the company. Not because it's some grand secret I need protected. Robert and I have never hidden our ownership. It's public record if anyone bothers to look. But because I don't want this repaired relationship built on the fact that your father turned out to be powerful. I want it built on the fact that your father is still, underneath everything, just your father. If you go back out there and suddenly start treating me differently because of what I own, you'll have learned exactly the wrong lesson from tonight." "Okay," Nathan said quietly. "Okay, Dad, I understand." He called Diane right there in that small officer's lounge, and I stepped outside to give him privacy, standing at the railing, looking out over the dark water and the distant lights of the port. Priya found me there a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee, and handed me one without a word, simply standing beside me at the railing for a while. "You handled that with more grace than most people would have," she said eventually. "I don't feel graceful," I admitted. "I feel like a man who just watched 39 years of small cracks finally show themselves all at once." "For what it's worth," Priya said, "I've worked in hospitality long enough to see a lot of families up close, in their best and worst moments. What I saw in there tonight wasn't cruelty from your son. It was fear. Fear of not measuring up to people he thought mattered more than his own parents. That's a very common, very human failure, Mr. Whitfield. It doesn't make it right, but it's not the same thing as a son who doesn't love his father." I thought about that for a long time, looking out at the water. "Maybe," I said finally. "I suppose we'll find out." Through the lounge window behind us, I could see Nathan still on the phone, his shoulders hunched, occasionally nodding, occasionally wiping at his face. Whatever Diane was saying to him on the other end of that call, it clearly wasn't gentle, and I found myself grateful for that. Some conversations need to hurt a little in order to actually heal anything real underneath. When Nathan finally came back outside to find me, his eyes were swollen, and he looked, for the first time in years, genuinely humbled rather than simply performing humility for an audience. "She's still hurt," he said quietly. "Really hurt. She said some things I needed to hear, even though they weren't easy to hear." "Good," I said. "That's exactly how it should be." "She also said—" Nathan paused, a small, watery laugh escaping him despite everything. "She said she can't believe I found out you own a cruise line before I found out how much you actually love me, and that says everything about how backward I've had my priorities." I allowed myself a small smile at that. It sounded exactly like something Diane would say. "Dad," Nathan continued, his voice steadying slightly, "I know I can't fix 3 years of this in one night. I know that. But I want to try. Really try. Not just for a few weeks until things feel normal again and I slip back into old habits. I mean it." "I believe you want to mean it," I said carefully. "Whether you actually follow through is something only time will show me, Nathan. I'm not going to pretend one emotional night on a cruise ship undoes 3 years of small wounds. But I'm willing to watch and I'm willing to hope because you're still my son, and I never stopped loving you, not for one single day, even when you called me not real family." Nathan's face crumpled slightly at that, and for a moment, standing there at that railing under the ship's lights, my son hugged me the way he used to when he was small, tight and unguarded, and I held him back the same way, and neither of us said anything else for a long while because sometimes, after enough silence, all the words in the world can't do what a simple, honest embrace can. The ship docked the next morning under a clear sky, and I want to tell you honestly that the story doesn't end with some perfect, movie-style resolution, because real life rarely offers those. What it offers instead, if you're fortunate, is a genuine, difficult, ongoing effort. Vanessa's reaction to everything took longer to settle than Nathan's did. When I saw her briefly the next morning at the port, she was polite, even warm in a careful, calculated way, but I could see her recalculating something behind her eyes. Some new social arithmetic involving her in-laws that I found, honestly, a little sad to witness. Whether that recalculation eventually turns into genuine respect, or simply a more polished performance of respect, is something I still can't fully say, even now, months later. Some people take longer to change than others, and some people never fully do. Harold, for his part, sent a formal written apology to the company a week after the cruise, care of Robert's office, though notably not addressed to me personally, and not mentioning the dining room incident by name. The kind of careful, lawyer-vetted apology written by a man more concerned with liability than sincerity. I read it once, filed it away, and never thought about it again. But Nathan surprised me slowly in the months that followed. He called every Sunday, without fail, something he hadn't done in years. Not long calls always, sometimes just 10 minutes, sometimes longer, but consistent, deliberate. The kind of effort that isn't flashy, but is exactly the kind that actually rebuilds something. He brought Sophie and Michael to visit us more often, and one Saturday afternoon, I found him in our garage, quietly cleaning the dust off that old wooden rocking horse I'd built years earlier, the one he'd shoved behind the paint cans. "I want to bring this to their house," he said, not quite looking at me. "Give it the spot it should have had from the start." I didn't say much in response. I just nodded and let him finish cleaning it in silence because some apologies are better shown than spoken. Diane, for her part, forgave more slowly than I did, which surprised me a little, given how quickly her heart usually softens toward our children. But I understood it too. She had absorbed a particular kind of pain that night on the phone, the specific pain of a mother told she wasn't real family by the son she'd carried and raised, and that kind of wound doesn't close overnight simply because an apology arrives, however sincere. It took nearly 8 months, but eventually Diane made her famous apple pie again for a family dinner at Nathan and Vanessa's house, unprompted, unasked. And when she set it down on the table, in front of the same dessert table area that had once been reserved for curated bakery items, Vanessa, to her credit, cleared a space for it front and center without a single word of hesitation. Small moments. That's really what rebuilding a family looks like, underneath all the drama. Not one grand cinematic reveal on a cruise ship, though that certainly happened and certainly mattered. The real work happened afterward, in 100 small, unglamorous Sunday phone calls and quiet garage conversations, and a pie finally given its rightful place on a table. People sometimes ask me when I tell this story whether I regret staying silent for so many years about who I really was, financially speaking. Whether I regret letting my own son believe, for nearly 4 decades, that his father was simply a modest retired teacher. I don't regret it, not entirely. I think there was real wisdom in wanting my children to love me for who I was rather than what I had. But if I'm honest, and I try always to be honest in the telling of this story, I think I let that wisdom curdle a little, over time, into something closer to a test I was quietly running on people I loved, without ever telling them the rules of the game they didn't know they were playing. That wasn't entirely fair to Nathan, even if his own behavior over those 3 years wasn't fair to us either. 2 things can be true at once. He failed to show us the respect we deserved, and I withheld a truth that might have shaped how he understood our whole relationship. Neither of those facts cancels the other out. What I know for certain, sitting here now, months after that cruise, is this. Money revealed something in my son that had been quietly rotting for years, but it didn't create it. The rot was already there, born out of insecurity, out of a desperate need to seem impressive to people whose approval he decided mattered more than his own parents' unconditional love. And once that rot was named, out loud, honestly, in a small officer's lounge on a cruise ship somewhere in the Caribbean, he had a choice about what to do with the truth of himself. He chose, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely, to do the work of becoming someone better. Not every family gets that chance. Not every silence gets broken in time. I think about that often. How easily this story could have gone differently. How easily my own pride or exhaustion could have kept me quiet for another year, another 5 years, until the distance between my son and me became too wide to close at all. I got lucky, in a strange way, that the truth surfaced when it did, in the exact dramatic circumstances it did. I don't think I would have chosen that particular stage for it, if given the choice. But I've learned at 68 years old that you rarely get to choose the stage on which the truth of your family finally reveals itself. You only get to choose what you do once the curtain is already pulled back. My father used to tell me to let things pass over me like weather. I understand now what he meant, and I also understand its limits. Some weather really does pass, and you're wiser for having weathered it quietly. But some weather is trying to tell you something urgent, something that requires you to finally step outside, into the storm, and meet it face to face. I stayed silent for 39 years about what I owned. I will never again stay silent about what I feel. That, I think, is the real inheritance I hope to leave behind. Not a cruise line, not a business empire, not a number written into a will. Just that one hard-earned lesson, passed down the only way lessons like that ever truly are passed down. by living them out loud, in front of the people who are watching you, whether you realize they're watching or not. My grandchildren were watching that night in the dining room, even if they didn't understand everything happening around them. Sophie asked me weeks later on one of our visits why Grandpa had surprised Daddy on the big boat. I thought about how to answer a 6-year-old honestly without frightening her with the heavier parts of the truth. Sometimes, I told her, grown-ups forget to say important things to each other for a long time. And sometimes, it takes something big and surprising to remind everyone to start saying those important things again. She seemed to accept that answer with the easy, uncomplicated grace that only children have, and went back to playing with the wooden rocking horse her father had finally, properly given her. I sat there and watched her rock gently back and forth on something I'd built with my own 2 hands years earlier. Something that had once been hidden away out of shame, now finally sitting exactly where it belonged. And for the first time in a very long while, the silence in our family didn't feel heavy at all. It felt like peace.